In a world where strength is measured by muscle mass and aggression by volume, Maria Santos stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing no more than a feather in the eyes of her critics. They laughed when she walked into the elite military training facility. They whispered when she signed up for the most grueling combat program in the country. They told her to go home, find a nice desk job, maybe try yoga instead. But what they didn't know was that Maria carried within her a fire forged by years of struggle, disappointment, and an unbreakable determination to prove that true strength doesn't come from size, it comes from heart, technique, and the refusal to accept limitations others try to place on you. This is the story of how a young woman who was told she couldn't fight ended up teaching some of the most elite warriors in the world what real combat looks like. It's about the moment when doubt transforms into confidence, when underestimation becomes your greatest weapon, and when the impossible becomes inevitable. Get ready to witness how Maria Santos went from being the joke of the training facility to becoming the legend who could disarm anyone, including the most feared SEAL instructor, with moves so fluid and effortless that even her critics had to admit they were witnessing something extraordinary. Maria Santos had always been small, but she had never felt small until the day she walked into the Riverside Community Center at age 12. The building smelled like old leather and sweat, with the sound of heavy bags being pounded echoing through the main gym area. Her mother, Carmen, had brought her here not by choice, but out of necessity. "Mija, you need to learn to defend yourself," Carmen had said that morning, her voice heavy with worry. "The world isn't always kind to girls like us." Maria understood what her mother meant without explanation. They lived in East Riverside, where the streets had their own rules and being small meant being a target. Carmen worked 2 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment, and she couldn't always be there to protect her daughter. Teaching Maria to fight wasn't about aggression, it was about survival. The community center's martial arts program was run by an old Korean War veteran named Frank Morrison. Frank was in his 70s but moved like a man half his age. His hands were scarred from decades of training, and his eyes held a sharpness that made people pay attention when he spoke. When Maria and her mother approached him about joining the program, Frank looked down at this tiny girl with serious dark eyes and saw something that made him nod slowly. "She's small," he said simply, "but small can be an advantage if you know how to use it." The other kids in the program were mostly boys, and they were all bigger than Maria. Some of them had been training for years and carried themselves with the confidence that came from knowing they could handle themselves in a fight. When Maria showed up for her first class wearing borrowed workout clothes that were too big for her, several of the boys started whispering and laughing. "Is that a new student or someone's little sister?" one of them asked loud enough for Maria to hear. "Maybe she's lost," another added. "The dance classes are down the hall." Frank's voice cut through their laughter like a blade. "That's enough. Everyone line up for warm-ups." The warm-ups alone nearly broke Maria. Running laps around the gym, push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, everything was designed to test physical limits, and Maria felt like she was constantly hitting hers. Her muscles burned, her lungs screamed for air, and sweat poured down her face as she struggled to keep up with kids who seemed to glide through the exercises. But she didn't quit. Even when her legs felt like they would collapse, even when the other students lapped her during runs, even when she was the last one to finish every exercise, Maria kept going. Frank noticed this. In his many years of teaching, he had seen countless students with natural talent give up the moment training became difficult. But here was this tiny girl who had no natural advantages, who was clearly struggling, and who refused to quit. After class, Frank called Maria over. "You're not the strongest student I've ever had," he said, "and you're certainly not the fastest. But you've got something more important than either of those things." "What's that?" Maria asked, still breathing hard from the workout. "You've got heart. And heart is what separates real fighters from people who just know how to throw punches." Frank began working with Maria individually after regular classes. He taught her that in martial arts, size and strength mattered far less than timing, technique, and understanding your opponent. He showed her how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to find pressure points that could disable someone twice her size, and, most importantly, how to move with fluidity and precision rather than brute force. "Fighting isn't about being the biggest person in the room," Frank would tell her as they practiced. "It's about being the smartest." Maria absorbed these lessons like a sponge. She studied every movement, analyzed every technique, and practiced for hours after everyone else had gone home. Carmen would often find her daughter in their small living room at night, going through forms and practicing footwork in slow motion, her face intense with concentration. The progress was slow at first. For months, Maria continued to struggle in sparring sessions with other students. They would overpower her with sheer size and strength, leaving her frustrated and doubting whether she would ever be able to truly defend herself. But Frank kept working with her, refining her technique and building her confidence one small victory at a time. The breakthrough came during a sparring session with Danny Rodriguez, a 15-year-old who had been training for 3 years and never lost a match to anyone in his weight class. Danny was known for his aggressive style and his tendency to show off, especially when sparring with newer students. When he was paired with Maria, he smirked and made a show of going easy on her. "Don't worry, I'll take it slow," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Maria said nothing. She had learned from Frank that talking was just wasted energy that could be better used for fighting. As they faced each other on the mat, she focused on everything Frank had taught her: watch your opponent's eyes, feel their energy, wait for the right moment. Danny came at her with a straightforward attack, confident that his size advantage would end the match quickly. But Maria wasn't there when his strike arrived. She had slipped to the side at the last second, using his momentum to guide him past her while she struck pressure points along his arm. Danny stumbled, confused by how she had simply disappeared from where she was supposed to be. He tried again, this time more aggressively, throwing a combination of punches that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Maria moved like water, flowing around his attacks while landing precise strikes to nerve clusters that Frank had shown her. Each hit was small and controlled, but they accumulated quickly. Within 30 seconds, Danny's right arm was going numb, and he couldn't understand why. The third time Danny attacked, Maria was ready. She intercepted his punch mid-flight, trapped his arm, and used a joint lock that Frank had taught her to bring the much larger boy to his knees. The move was so smooth and effortless that for a moment, everyone in the gym fell silent. "How did you do that?" Danny asked, genuine surprise replacing his earlier arrogance. Maria helped him to his feet. "I listened to what Sensei Frank taught me," she said simply. From that day forward, everything changed for Maria at the community center. The other students stopped making jokes about her size and started asking her to show them the techniques she used. Frank smiled more during her training sessions, and Maria began to understand that she wasn't just learning to fight, she was discovering a natural gift that had been waiting inside her all along. But the real test wouldn't come on the mats of the community center. It would come on the streets of East Riverside, where the stakes were real and there were no referees to stop the fight when things got dangerous. Maria's first real-world confrontation happened on a Thursday evening as she was walking home from school. She was taking her usual route through the neighborhood when she noticed 3 older teenagers following her. She had seen them around before, local kids who had dropped out of school and spent their time looking for trouble. Maria quickened her pace, but they matched her speed, staying about 20 feet behind her. "Hey, little girl," one of them called out. "Were you going so fast?" Maria didn't answer. Frank had taught her that sometimes the best defense was avoiding confrontation entirely. She turned down a side street that would take her to a busier area where there would be more people around. But the 3 boys anticipated this move and cut her off at the next intersection. "We're talking to you," the leader said. He was tall and thin with tattoos covering his arms and a cruel smile that made Maria's stomach tighten. "It's rude to ignore people when they're being friendly." "I don't want any trouble," Maria said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear that was building inside her. "Trouble?" The boy laughed. "Who said anything about trouble? We just want to get to know you better. Maybe you got some money you could share with new friends." The other 2 boys spread out, trying to surround her. Maria recognized the tactic from her training with Frank. They were attempting to cut off her escape routes and force her into a position where she would have no choice but to comply with their demands. But they had made a crucial mistake. They assumed that because Maria was small and appeared helpless, she would panic and become an easy victim. They had no way of knowing that she had spent the last 2 years learning how to turn size disadvantages into tactical advantages. Maria shifted her stance slightly, centering her balance the way Frank had taught her. She kept her hands relaxed at her sides, showing no obvious signs of preparation for combat. To the 3 boys, she still looked like a frightened girl who was about to hand over whatever money she had. "I really don't have anything," Maria said, taking a small step backward. The movement looked like retreat, but it was actually positioning her closer to a wall that would prevent them from attacking her from behind. "Come on, don't make this hard," the leader said, reaching out to grab her arm. That was the moment Maria had been waiting for. The instant his hand moved toward her, she reacted with lightning speed. She caught his wrist, twisted it in a way that Frank had shown her dozens of times, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling into one of his friends. The second boy tried to grab her from the side, but Maria ducked under his reach and struck 2 pressure points along his ribcage. The hits weren't hard enough to cause serious damage, but they were precise enough to make his left side go numb and throw off his balance. The third boy hesitated, confused by how quickly his friends had been neutralized. That hesitation cost him. Maria moved forward with a combination of strikes that targeted nerve clusters in his shoulder and arm. Within seconds, he was backing away, his right arm hanging uselessly at his side. "What the hell?" the leader gasped, trying to regain his footing. "What did you do to us?" Maria didn't answer. She was already moving, using the confusion to create distance between herself and the 3 boys. By the time they recovered enough to think about pursuing her, she was 3 blocks away and approaching a busy street where there were plenty of witnesses. That night, Maria told Frank about the encounter. She expected him to be proud of how she had used her training in a real situation. Instead, he looked thoughtful and slightly concerned. "You did well," he said finally. "But you need to understand something important. What happened today will get around the neighborhood. People are going to start talking about the little girl who can fight. That kind of reputation can be dangerous." "Why?" Maria asked. "Because there will always be someone who wants to test themselves against you. And some of those people won't be teenagers looking for lunch money. Some of them will be serious fighters who want to prove they can beat the girl everyone's talking about." Frank was right. Within a week, stories about Maria's encounter had spread throughout East Riverside, growing more dramatic with each telling. Some people said she had knocked out 3 gang members with her bare hands. Others claimed she had some kind of secret martial arts training that made her deadly despite her size. The attention made Maria uncomfortable, but it also brought opportunities. Frank introduced her to other martial arts instructors in the area, and she began training in multiple disciplines. She learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from a former UFC fighter who taught classes at a gym across town. She studied boxing with a retired professional who emphasized speed and precision over power. She even learned some basic military combatives from a Marine veteran who ran weekend workshops for serious martial artists. Each instructor taught her something different, but they all reached the same conclusion: Maria had an extraordinary natural ability that went far beyond her size or training. She possessed an intuitive understanding of body mechanics, timing, and leverage that couldn't be taught. She could see openings in an opponent's defense that others missed, and she moved with a fluidity that made complex techniques look effortless. By the time Maria turned 15, she was training 6 days a week and had earned respect from martial artists throughout the city. She had never lost a sparring match, regardless of the size or experience of her opponent. More importantly, she had developed a quiet confidence that came from knowing she could handle herself in any situation. But all of her local success was just preparation for what was coming next. Maria's reputation had started to reach beyond East Riverside, attracting attention from people who understood that her skills were truly exceptional. One of those people was Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, a Marine recruiter who had heard about a teenage girl who was dominating every martial arts competition in the region. Walsh came to observe one of Maria's training sessions, and what she saw impressed her enough to approach Maria and her mother about opportunities in the military. She explained that the Marines had programs for exceptional martial artists, and that Maria's skills could open doors to specialized training that wasn't available anywhere else. "Your daughter has a gift," Walsh told Carmen. but she needs the right environment to develop it fully. The civilian martial arts world can only take her so far. Carmen was hesitant. She had raised Maria to be strong and independent, but the military seemed like a dangerous path for her small daughter. Maria, however, was intrigued. She had always felt like she was capable of more than what her current environment could offer, and the idea of testing herself against the best fighters in the world appealed to her. "What would I have to do?" Maria asked. "Finish high school, stay in shape, and be ready to work harder than you've ever worked before," Walsh replied. "If you're serious about this, I can arrange for you to visit some of our training facilities and meet some of our instructors. But I'll warn you, what we do isn't a game. It's the real thing." Maria looked at her mother, then back at Walsh. "I'm ready for the real thing." That conversation set in motion a series of events that would eventually lead Maria to the most elite military training facilities in the country. But first, she had to prove herself worthy of that opportunity. Walsh arranged for Maria to participate in a series of evaluations that would test not just her fighting ability, but her mental toughness, her ability to learn under pressure, and her potential for leadership. The evaluations would take place over the course of her final year in high school, culminating in a final test that would determine whether she had what it took to train with the most elite warriors in the military. For Maria, it was the opportunity she had been preparing for her entire life, even though she hadn't known it at the time. As she stood in her small apartment that night, looking at the paperwork Walsh had given her, Maria thought about how far she had come from that scared 12-year-old who had walked into the community center. She had transformed herself from a potential victim into a force to be reckoned with. But the real test was still ahead of her, and it would determine whether she was truly ready to compete at the highest levels of combat training. The journey from East Riverside to the elite ranks of military combat training would be long and challenging. But Maria Santos was ready for the challenge. She had spent years proving that size didn't matter, that heart and technique could overcome any physical disadvantage, and that the quiet girl everyone had underestimated was capable of extraordinary things. The next phase of her journey was about to begin, and it would test everything she had learned about herself, about fighting, and about what it meant to be truly strong. The Marine Corps evaluation facility looked nothing like the community center where Maria had first learned to fight. Located on a sprawling base in North Carolina, the complex featured state-of-the-art training equipment, obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone with a twisted imagination, and instructors whose presence alone made even experienced fighters nervous. Maria arrived on a humid Tuesday morning in June, 3 days after graduating high school. She carried a single duffel bag containing everything she owned that mattered, a few changes of clothes, her training gear, and a photo of her mother that she kept for motivation. Carmen had wanted to come with her, but work commitments made it impossible. They had said their goodbyes at the bus station in Riverside, both trying to act like this was just a temporary separation. "Remember what Sensei Frank taught you," Carmen had whispered as she hugged her daughter. "Size doesn't matter if you have heart." Now, standing in front of the evaluation center, Maria wondered if heart would be enough for what was coming next. The other candidates arriving for the program looked like they had been specifically designed for military service. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of physical dominance. Maria, at 17 and barely 5'3", looked like someone's little sister who had wandered into the wrong place. Master Sergeant Walsh was waiting for her at the entrance. In the months since their first meeting, she had stayed in touch with Maria, providing guidance on physical conditioning and mental preparation. Seeing her now, Walsh smiled and shook her hand firmly. "Ready for this, Santos?" Walsh asked. "Yes, Master Sergeant," Maria replied, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Good. Because this isn't going to be like anything you've experienced before. The instructors here don't care about your reputation back home. They don't care about your community center championships. The only thing that matters is what you can do right now, under pressure, when everything is on the line." The evaluation program was designed to last 2 weeks and would test every aspect of a candidate's potential for elite military service. Physical conditioning, combat skills, tactical thinking, leadership ability, and psychological resilience would all be measured and analyzed. Out of the 36 candidates who started the program, typically fewer than 10 would be recommended for advanced training. Maria's first challenge came during the initial physical assessment. The other candidates were put through standard military fitness tests, push-ups, pull-ups, distance running, and basic strength measurements. For Maria, the instructors had designed something different. They wanted to see how she would perform against opponents who had significant size and strength advantages. The testing took place in a large gymnasium with mats covering most of the floor. 3 instructors served as evaluators, taking notes on tablets as they observed each candidate's performance. When Maria's turn came, she was paired against Jake Morrison, a former college wrestler who stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed nearly twice as much as she did. "This doesn't seem fair," Jake said as they faced each other on the mat. He wasn't being condescending, he genuinely seemed concerned about hurting someone so much smaller than himself. "Fairness isn't the point," replied Chief Instructor Marcus Drake, a former Army Ranger whose reputation for toughness was legendary even among military personnel. "Santos, you have 2 minutes to demonstrate your combat effectiveness against a larger opponent. Morrison, you have 2 minutes to neutralize her using whatever means necessary. Begin." Jake hesitated for a moment, still uncomfortable with the size disparity. That hesitation was all Maria needed. She moved forward with a speed that caught him completely off guard, slipping inside his reach and striking pressure points along his arm and shoulder. Jake tried to use his size to overwhelm her, but Maria was already gone, having flowed around his attempted grapple and positioned herself behind him. What followed was 2 minutes of the most impressive combat demonstration the instructors had seen in years. Maria moved like water around Jake's attacks, using his momentum against him and landing precise strikes that gradually wore down his ability to fight effectively. She never tried to match his strength directly. Instead, she redirected his energy, found openings in his defense, and attacked with surgical precision. When the buzzer sounded, Jake was on his knees, his left arm completely numb from nerve strikes and his breathing labored from the accumulated impact of Maria's attacks. Maria herself looked like she had barely exerted herself. She helped Jake to his feet and bowed respectfully, just as Frank had taught her to do after every sparring session. "Outstanding," Chief Drake said, making notes on his tablet. "Morrison, report to medical for evaluation." "Santos, excellent work. Be ready for individual testing this afternoon." The individual testing turned out to be something unlike anything Maria had experienced before. Instead of sparring against other candidates, she was brought to a specialized training room where military combat instructors would test her skills in a variety of scenarios. These weren't just martial arts techniques, they were life-or-death situations that military personnel might encounter in real combat. The first scenario involved weapon disarmament. An instructor armed with a rubber knife would attack her using realistic combat movements, and she had to neutralize the threat without getting killed in the process. Maria's training with Frank had included some weapon defense, but this was far more intense and unpredictable than anything she had practiced. The instructor, Staff Sergeant Kim Torres, was a petite woman with lightning-fast reflexes and 20 years of military experience. She attacked Maria with combinations that seemed impossible to defend against, coming from multiple angles with speed and precision that would have overwhelmed most fighters. But Maria had learned to see patterns in movement that others missed. She watched Torres' eyes, read the subtle shifts in her body weight, and anticipated attacks before they fully developed. When Torres committed to a thrust with the rubber knife, Maria intercepted her wrist, twisted it to neutralize the weapon, and used leverage to bring the experienced instructor to the ground. "Impressive," Torres said as she got back to her feet. "Let's try that again, but this time I'll be trying to kill you for real." The second attempt was even more aggressive than the first. Torres used footwork and feints that would have confused most opponents, but Maria adapted quickly to her style. This time, when she disarmed Torres, she did it so smoothly that the instructor's weapon simply appeared in Maria's hand as if by magic. "How long have you been training?" Torres asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "About 5 years, Sergeant," Maria replied. 5 years? That's impossible. You move like someone with decades of experience." Chief Drake, who had been observing from the side of the room, stepped forward. "Torres is right, Santos. Your technical skill level is far beyond what should be possible with only 5 years of training. Who taught you? Maria explained her background, starting with Frank Morrison at the community center and continuing through her training with various instructors around Riverside. As she talked, the instructors exchanged glances that suggested they were impressed not just by her abilities, but by the dedication required to reach such a level of skill. "We're going to try something different," Drake said. "Torres, Colin Martinez and Johnson. I want to see how Santos handles multiple attackers." What followed was the most challenging combat scenario Maria had ever faced. 3 experienced military combat instructors attacked her simultaneously, using coordination and tactics that would have quickly overwhelmed any normal fighter. But Maria wasn't normal. She moved between her attackers like smoke, using their numbers against them by positioning herself so they interfered with each other's attacks. She struck pressure points, used joint locks, and employed throws that sent her opponents stumbling into each other. Within 3 minutes, all 3 instructors were on the ground, and Maria was standing in the center of the room, breathing hard but victorious. "Unbelievable," Johnson muttered as he got back to his feet. "I've never seen anything like that." "Neither have I," Drake agreed. "Santos, you're not just naturally gifted, you're operating at a level that suggests you have some kind of intuitive understanding of combat that goes beyond training." The rest of the evaluation period passed in a blur of increasingly difficult tests. Maria excelled at everything they threw at her: tactical planning exercises, leadership scenarios, psychological evaluations, and combat simulations that pushed her to her absolute limits. By the end of 2 weeks, she had not only passed every test but had set new records in several categories. The final evaluation was conducted by Colonel Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer of the entire training facility. Hayes had personally trained some of the most elite special operations personnel in the military, and her approval was required for advancement to the highest levels of combat training. "Sit down, Santos," Hayes said as Maria entered her office. The room was spartanly decorated with military commendations and photos of Hayes with various special operations units from around the world. "I've been reviewing your evaluation results," Hayes continued, "and they're frankly unprecedented. Your combat skills are at a level that typically takes decades to develop. Your tactical thinking shows natural leadership ability. Your psychological profile indicates exceptional resilience and adaptability. In short, you've tested off the charts in every category we measure." Maria remained silent, unsure of how to respond to such praise from someone of Colonel Hayes' stature. "The question now is what to do with you," Hayes said. "We have several programs that would be lucky to have someone of your caliber. Special Forces, Marine Force Recon, Navy SEAL support units, all of them would benefit from your skills. What do you recommend, ma'am?" Maria asked. Hayes leaned back in her chair and studied Maria for a long moment. "Normally, I would recommend that someone your age spend a few years in regular military service before attempting elite training. But you're not normal, Santos. Your abilities are so far beyond the average that putting you in a standard unit would be a waste of your potential and their time. I want to train with the best," Maria said. "Whatever that means, wherever that leads." "The best," Hayes repeated thoughtfully. "The absolute best would be the Navy SEAL training program at Coronado. But there are 2 problems with that option. First, women aren't currently allowed in SEAL training, though that policy may change in the future. Second, even if you could get in, the program has a failure rate of over 80%, and most of the people who fail are much larger and stronger than you are." Maria felt her heart sink. After everything she had accomplished, was she going to be stopped by bureaucracy and outdated policies? However, Hayes continued, "There is another option. We have a joint training facility where the most elite units from all branches of the military send their instructors to learn advanced combat techniques. The instructors there work with experimental training methods and cutting-edge tactical concepts. It's not officially a school, it's more like a laboratory for developing the next generation of combat training." "What would I do there?" Maria asked. "You would train alongside some of the most experienced combat instructors in the world. You would learn techniques that aren't taught anywhere else. And You would help develop new training methods that could revolutionize how we prepare military personnel for combat. It sounded like exactly what Maria had been hoping for without knowing it existed. How do I get there? You don't apply, Hayes said. You get invited. And I'm recommending you for that invitation based on what you've shown us here. 3 weeks later, Maria found herself on another military base, this one even more secure and secretive than the evaluation facility. The Joint Advanced Combat Training Center was hidden in the mountains of Colorado, accessible only by military transport and surrounded by enough security to protect state secrets. The other students at the facility were unlike anyone Maria had ever met. They were experienced special operations personnel, elite military instructors, and combat veterans who had been selected for their exceptional abilities. Most of them had more combat experience than Maria had years of life. When she walked into the main training facility for the first time, conversations stopped and heads turned. It wasn't just her size that drew attention, it was her youth. Everyone else at the facility was at least in their late 20s, and most were in their 30s or 40s. Maria, at 18, looked like a teenager who had wandered into the wrong building. The commanding officer of the facility was Colonel James Mitchell, a former Green Beret who had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. When he addressed the new arrivals, his eyes lingered on Maria with what looked like skepticism. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell began, "you're here because you represent the absolute pinnacle of military combat training. Each of you has proven yourselves in the field and demonstrated exceptional skill in your respective areas of expertise." He paused and looked directly at Maria. "Some of you are here because of your experience. Others are here because of their potential. Regardless of how you got here, you'll be expected to perform at the same level as everyone else. There are no participation trophies in this program, and there are no second chances." The training at the joint facility was unlike anything Maria had experienced before. Instead of learning specific martial arts techniques or military procedures, they were studying the fundamental principles of combat effectiveness. They analyzed body mechanics, energy transfer, psychological warfare, and tactical adaptation at a level of detail that bordered on scientific research. Maria's first instructor was Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Williams, a Navy SEAL trainer who had personally trained hundreds of special operations personnel. Williams had initially been skeptical about having a teenager in her advanced combat course, but that skepticism disappeared during their first training session. "Show me your best technique for dealing with a larger opponent," Williams instructed. Maria demonstrated a complex sequence that combined elements from multiple martial arts, flowing seamlessly between strikes, grapples, and throws. The movement was so fluid and technically perfect that Williams asked her to repeat it several times so she could study the mechanics. "Where did you learn that?" Williams asked. "I adapted it from techniques I learned from different instructors," Maria replied. "I've always been able to see how different styles complement each other." "Adapted?" Williams raised an eyebrow. "You mean you created that sequence yourself?" "I guess so, Master Chief. I just use whatever works best for each situation." Williams stared at Maria for a long moment, then shook her head in amazement. "Santos, do you understand what you just did? You demonstrated a technique that combines elements from at least 4 different martial arts systems, executed it with perfect form, and you created it yourself through intuitive understanding of combat mechanics. Is that unusual, Master Chief?" "Unusual?" Williams laughed. "Santos, that's revolutionary. Most instructors spend decades studying single martial arts systems. You're synthesizing multiple systems instinctively." Word of Maria's abilities spread quickly through the facility. Other instructors began requesting opportunities to work with her, not to teach her, but to learn from her unique approach to combat. She was still the youngest person at the facility, but her status had shifted from questionable addition to valuable asset. The real test of her abilities came when she was matched against Gunnery Sergeant David Chen, one of the most respected hand-to-hand combat instructors in the Marine Corps. Chen had been training Marines for 15 years and had never met a student who could challenge him in unarmed combat. Their sparring session was scheduled to last 5 minutes, with the goal of evaluating Maria's ability to perform against an elite instructor. Chen approached the match seriously but confidently, expecting to demonstrate the difference between potential and experience. The match lasted 37 seconds. Maria moved with a speed and precision that Chen had never encountered before. She didn't just counter his attacks, she anticipated them, flowing around his strikes like she could read his mind. When she finally took him down, it was with a technique so subtle and effective that Chen didn't realize he was falling until he hit the mat. "What just happened?" Chen asked as Maria helped him to his feet. "You telegraphed your intentions with micro-movements in your shoulders and hips," Maria explained. "Once I learned to read those signals, I could see your attacks coming before you fully committed to them." Chen stared at her in disbelief. "How did you learn to see those signals?" "I've always been able to see them," Maria said simply. "I thought everyone could." That evening, Colonel Mitchell called Maria to his office. Unlike her previous meetings with commanding officers, this one felt different. Mitchell didn't seem skeptical or evaluative, he seemed genuinely curious about what he was dealing with. "Santos, I've been in this business for 30 years, Mitchell began. I've trained with the best fighters in the world, and I've seen exceptional talent before. But what you're doing here isn't just exceptional, it's unprecedented." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, unsure of where the conversation was heading. "I'm not giving you a compliment," Mitchell said. "I'm trying to understand a phenomenon. Your instructors tell me you're not just learning techniques, you're innovating them. You're not just adapting to opponents, you're reading them at a level that suggests some kind of enhanced perception." Mitchell leaned forward in his chair. "I want to try an experiment. Tomorrow, I'm bringing in someone for you to train against. He's not from this facility, and he's not someone you could have prepared for. I want to see how you handle a completely unknown opponent." The next morning, Maria arrived at the main training facility to find Colonel Mitchell waiting with a man she had never seen before. He was tall and lean with graying hair and the kind of relaxed confidence that came from decades of proven competence. When Mitchell introduced him, Maria understood why this was considered a test. "Santos, meet Command Master Chief Robert Harrison. Harrison is the lead hand-to-hand combat instructor for Navy SEAL training at Coronado. He's here to evaluate our training methods, and I've asked him to assess your abilities." Harrison looked Maria up and down with the clinical detachment of a professional evaluator. "You're the one everyone's talking about," he said. "The teenage girl who's supposedly revolutionizing combat training." "I'm just trying to learn, Master Chief," Maria replied. "We'll see about that," Harrison said. "I understand you think you can read opponents' intentions before they act on them." "It's not something I think about," Maria said. "It's just something I notice." Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Let's test that theory." What followed was the most challenging combat encounter of Maria's life. Harrison moved with the controlled aggression of someone who had spent years training elite warriors. His attacks were unpredictable, his defense was nearly impenetrable, and his experience showed in every movement. But Maria had faced challenging opponents before, and she had learned to trust her instincts completely. She watched Harrison's micro-expressions, felt his energy shifts, and gradually began to see the patterns in his seemingly random attacks. It took longer than usual, but eventually she found her rhythm. When the match ended, Harrison was on his back looking up at the ceiling, and Maria was standing over him with a respectful expression on her face. The whole thing had taken less than 3 minutes. "Unbelievable," Harrison muttered as he sat up. "In 30 years of training SEALs, I've never been taken down that quickly by anyone." "You're very skilled, Master Chief," Maria said, offering him a hand up. "It took me a while to figure out your patterns." "Patterns?" Harrison laughed as he got to his feet. "Santos, I don't have patterns. I've spent decades learning to be unpredictable." "Everyone has patterns," Maria replied. "You just have to know how to see them." Harrison turned to Colonel Mitchell with an expression that mixed amazement with something that might have been concern. "Mitchell, this young woman isn't just gifted, she's operating at a level that shouldn't be possible. Where did you find her?" "She found us," Mitchell replied. "The question is, what do we do with her now?" That question would prove to be more complex than anyone anticipated. Maria had demonstrated abilities that exceeded those of the most elite military instructors in the country. She had proven that she could not only compete with experienced warriors but could consistently defeat them using techniques that seemed to come from some deeper understanding of combat itself. But her success at the joint training facility was just the beginning. Word of her abilities was reaching the highest levels of military command, and people with influence were starting to ask questions about the teenage girl who was rewriting the rules of combat training. The next phase of Maria's journey would take her to places she had never imagined and put her abilities to tests that would determine not just her own future, but the future of combat training itself. She had proven that size and age were no barriers to excellence, but now she would have to prove that she could handle the responsibilities that came with being considered the most naturally gifted fighter the military had ever encountered. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning that would change everything for Maria Santos. Colonel Mitchell handed her the official document with an expression that mixed pride with concern. The letterhead bore the seal of the Naval Special Warfare Command, and the contents were brief but momentous. Santos, you've been invited to participate in a classified training evaluation at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, Mitchell said. This isn't just an honor, it's unprecedented. No woman has ever been invited to train at this level with SEAL instructors. Maria read the document carefully, trying to understand the full implications of what she was being offered. What exactly would I be doing there, sir? You'll be training alongside some of the most elite warriors in the world, Mitchell explained. But this isn't about you joining the SEALs, that pathway isn't available yet. This is about you demonstrating your techniques to their instructors and potentially revolutionizing how they approach combat training. The weight of the opportunity settled on Maria's shoulders. Everything she had worked for, every technique she had developed, every opponent she had faced had led to this moment. She was being asked to prove herself at the highest possible level of military combat training. When do I leave? She asked. Next week. But, Santos, you need to understand what you're walking into. The instructors at Coronado aren't just skilled, they're legends. These are men who have survived the most rigorous military training in the world and have proven themselves in actual combat. They're not going to be impressed by your reputation or your potential. They're going to want to see what you can actually do. The flight to San Diego gave Maria time to think about how far she had come from that scared 12-year-old in East Riverside. She was now 19 years old, had trained at the most elite military facilities in the country, and had defeated some of the most skilled fighters in the armed forces. But she knew that Coronado would be different. This wouldn't just be about proving her abilities, it would be about earning the respect of warriors who had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of combat excellence. The Naval Special Warfare Training Center looked like exactly what it was, a facility designed to create the most elite fighters in the world. The buildings were functional rather than impressive, but the equipment was state-of-the-art, and the atmosphere was thick with the intensity that came from constant high-level training. Master Chief Harrison was waiting for her at the main gate, and his expression was more serious than she had seen before. During the drive to the training facility, he explained what she could expect. The instructors here have heard about you, he said, but they're skeptical. They've seen a lot of supposedly exceptional fighters over the years, and most of them don't live up to the hype. You're going to have to prove yourself all over again, and the standards here are higher than anything you've experienced. Maria nodded, understanding that she was starting from zero despite everything she had accomplished elsewhere. What's the first test? You'll be working with our senior combat instructor, Senior Chief Mark Daniels. Daniels has been training SEALs for 20 years, and he's never met a fighter he couldn't handle. If you can impress him, you'll get the chance to work with the rest of the staff. Senior Chief Daniels looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a SEAL instructor. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall with shoulders that seemed designed to carry impossible loads. His hands were scarred from decades of training, and his eyes held the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing he was responsible for preparing men for life-or-death situations. So you're Santos, he said as Maria entered the main training facility. The teenage girl who supposedly revolutionizes combat training. I'm just here to learn, Senior Chief, Maria replied. Good answer, Daniels said. Because the first thing you need to learn is that everything you think you know about fighting means nothing here. We don't train martial artists, we train killers. We don't teach sport fighting, we teach survival. Daniels led her to a training area that looked more like a warehouse than a traditional gym. The space was filled with equipment that Maria didn't recognize: complex obstacle courses, specialized training devices, and areas set up to simulate various combat environments. "Here's how this works," Daniels explained. "I'm going to attack you using techniques designed to kill, not score points. Your job is to neutralize me before I neutralize you. There are no rules, no referees, and no time limits. The fight ends when one of us can't continue." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. This was different from anything she had experienced before. Every previous training session had been conducted in a controlled environment with safety measures and limitations. What Daniels was describing sounded like actual combat. "Are you ready for that level of intensity?" Daniels asked, studying her face for any sign of hesitation. "Yes, Senior Chief," Maria replied, and she was surprised to realize that she meant it completely. The fight began without warning. One moment Daniels was explaining the parameters, and the next he was attacking her with a speed and ferocity that took her breath away. His first strike would have knocked out most opponents, but Maria wasn't where she was supposed to be when it arrived. What followed was unlike any combat encounter Maria had ever experienced. Daniels fought with a combination of skill, experience, and controlled aggression that was absolutely terrifying. He used techniques that were designed to end fights permanently, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a serious confrontation. But Maria had learned to read opponents at a level that went beyond conscious thought. Even as she struggled to avoid Daniels' devastating attacks, she was analyzing his movement patterns, his energy expenditure, and the subtle telegraphs that preceded his strikes. Gradually, she began to see openings that shouldn't have existed. The breakthrough came when Daniels committed to a combination that would have overwhelmed any normal opponent. Maria slipped between his attacks like smoke, struck 3 pressure points in rapid succession, and used a leverage technique to send the much larger man crashing to the floor. The training facility fell completely silent. Daniels lay on his back, staring at the ceiling with an expression of pure disbelief. Maria stood over him, breathing hard but victorious, waiting to see how he would react to being defeated by someone a third his size. "How?" Daniels asked as he sat up. "How did you see that opening? I've used that combination 1,000 times, and no one has ever countered it." "You drop your left shoulder slightly before you transition to the third strike," Maria explained. "It's only for a fraction of a second, but it creates an opening if you know where to look for it." Daniels stared at her with growing amazement. "You saw a micro-movement that lasts a fraction of a second, analyzed it in real time, and created a counterattack strategy while under assault from techniques designed to kill you?" "I guess so, Senior Chief." "Santos, that's not humanly possible. What you just described requires processing speed and pattern recognition that goes beyond normal human capabilities." Other instructors had gathered around to see what was happening. Word was spreading quickly through the facility that the teenage girl had just defeated their most feared combat instructor in a no-holds-barred fight. Maria could see skepticism, amazement, and something that might have been concern on their faces. "Let's try that again," Daniels said, getting to his feet. "But this time, I'm going to vary my attack patterns specifically to prevent you from reading them." The second encounter was even more intense than the first. Daniels used every technique he knew, changed his style multiple times during the fight, and employed psychological tactics designed to disrupt Maria's concentration. But Maria adapted to each change faster than should have been possible, learning his new patterns even as he created them. When the fight ended, Daniels was on the ground again, and this time he stayed there for a full minute before attempting to get up. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable. In 20 years of training the most elite fighters in the world, I've never encountered anything like this." The news of Maria's performance spread beyond the training facility within hours. By evening, she was being introduced to Captain Robert Stone, the commanding officer of the entire Naval Special Warfare Training Center. Stone had personally overseen the training of thousands of SEALs and was considered one of the foremost experts on elite military combat training. "Santos, I've been briefed on your performance today," Stone said as they met in his office. "Senior Chief Daniels tells me you defeated him twice using techniques he's never seen before." "I just used what I've learned, sir," Maria replied. "What you've learned," Stone repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, where exactly did you learn to fight at a level that exceeds our most experienced instructors?" Maria explained her background, starting with Frank Morrison and continuing through her training at various military facilities. As she talked, Stone's expression grew more thoughtful and concerned. "Santos, what you're describing doesn't add up," Stone said when she finished. "The skill level you've demonstrated requires decades of experience and training that you simply haven't had time to complete. How do you account for this discrepancy?" "I don't know, sir," Maria admitted. "I've always been able to see patterns in movement that other people miss. I've always been able to adapt to new techniques faster than expected. I thought everyone could do these things until instructors started telling me otherwise." Stone leaned back in his chair and studied Maria for a long moment. "Tomorrow, I want you to work with our entire senior instructor staff. Not individually, all of them at once. I want to see how you handle multiple elite opponents working together." The next morning, Maria found herself facing 5 of the most experienced combat instructors at Coronado. These were men who had trained thousands of special operations personnel and had personally seen combat in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. Together, they represented more than a century of combined fighting experience. "This isn't a fair fight," Senior Chief Daniels said as they prepared for the encounter. "It's 5 against 1, and we're all larger, stronger, and more experienced than you are." "Fair isn't the point," Captain Stone replied from his observation position. "Santos, your job is to survive for 10 minutes against coordinated attacks from 5 elite instructors. If you can do that, we'll consider this evaluation a success." Maria centered herself and tried to calm the nervous energy that was building in her stomach. She had never faced this many skilled opponents simultaneously, and she wasn't sure if her abilities would be sufficient for such an overwhelming challenge. "Begin," Stone commanded. What followed was 10 minutes of the most intense combat Maria had ever experienced. The 5 instructors attacked her with perfect coordination, using tactics that prevented her from isolating any single opponent. They came at her from multiple angles, forced her to constantly move and adapt, and employed techniques that would have quickly defeated any normal fighter. But Maria wasn't normal. As the fight progressed, she began to see patterns in their coordination. She learned to read the micro-communications between the instructors and started anticipating their team attacks. Most importantly, she discovered that she could use their numbers against them by positioning herself so they interfered with each other's movements. By the 5-minute mark, Maria had not only survived but had begun to take control of the encounter. She was striking pressure points, using throws and joint locks, and moving with a fluidity that made her almost impossible to pin down. The instructors found themselves fighting not just Maria, but each other as she manipulated their positions to create confusion and openings. When the 10-minute buzzer sounded, all 5 instructors were on the ground, and Maria was standing in the center of the training area, breathing hard but victorious. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the scratch of Captain Stone's pen as he made notes on his evaluation form. "Gentlemen," Stone said finally, "help me understand what just happened here." "She beat us," Senior Chief Daniels said simply. "All 5 of us, working together, with decades of combined experience, and she beat us like we were beginners." "That's impossible," said Chief Martinez, one of the other instructors. "No one person can defeat 5 elite fighters simultaneously. The math doesn't work." "The math doesn't matter if you can see patterns that others can't," Maria said. "You were coordinating your attacks, but coordination creates predictability. Once I learned to read your team patterns, I could use your coordination against you." The instructors exchanged glances that suggested they were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness. Captain Stone stood up and walked over to where Maria was standing. "Santos, what you've just accomplished is theoretically impossible according to every model of combat effectiveness we use," Stone said. Yet here you are, having defeated our 5 most experienced instructors in a fair fight.
What does that mean, sir?
Maria asked. It means we need to completely rethink how we understand combat training, Stone replied.
And it means you're going to help us do it. The following weeks at Coronado were unlike anything Maria had experienced before.
Instead of being a student, she found herself in the unique position of teaching techniques to instructors who had decades more experience than she did. The senior staff wanted to understand not just what she did, but how she did it. Walk us through your thought process during that 5-on-1 encounter, Senior Chief Daniels asked during one of their analysis sessions. I watched all of you simultaneously and looked for patterns in your coordination, Maria explained. Each of you has individual fighting patterns, but when you work together, you create team patterns that are actually more predictable than your individual styles. Can you teach others to see these patterns? Asked Chief Martinez.
Maria considered the question carefully.
I think so, but it requires learning to process visual information differently than most people do. You have to learn to see multiple opponents as a single system rather than as separate threats. Over the next month, Maria worked with the Coronado instructors to develop training methods that could teach other fighters to see the patterns she saw naturally. They created exercises that enhanced peripheral vision, drills that improved pattern recognition, and techniques that helped fighters process multiple streams of information simultaneously. The breakthrough came when they tested the new training methods on a group of advanced SEAL candidates. After 6 weeks of intensive pattern recognition training, the candidates showed dramatic improvements in their ability to handle multiple opponents and complex combat scenarios.
This is revolutionary, Captain Stone told Maria after reviewing the test results. You've not only demonstrated unprecedented individual combat abilities, you've created training methods that can dramatically improve the performance of our entire program.
But Maria's greatest challenge was still ahead of her. Word of her achievements had reached the highest levels of military command, and people with significant influence were asking to see her abilities firsthand.
The request came from Admiral Patricia Hendricks, the commander of all naval special warfare operations.
Santos, Admiral Hendricks wants to observe a demonstration of your abilities, Captain Stone explained. She's bringing several other high-ranking officers, including representatives from other branches of the military.
What kind of demonstration? Maria asked.
The kind that will determine the future of your career and, possibly the future of combat training itself, Stone replied.
You'll be facing our absolute best instructor in a no-holds-barred encounter. If you can demonstrate your abilities at that level, under that kind of scrutiny, it will open doors that you can't imagine.
That absolute best instructor turned out to be Command Master Chief William Hayes, a legend in the special operations community. Hayes had been a SEAL for 25 years, had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades, and had personally trained some of the most elite warriors in the military. He was also the man responsible for developing many of the advanced combat techniques currently used throughout the special operations community. So you're the famous Maria Santos, Hayes said when they met the day before the demonstration.
The teenage girl who's supposedly revolutionizing combat training.
I'm just trying to learn and improve, Master Chief, Maria replied. We'll see about that tomorrow, Hayes said. Because I'll be trying to end this fight as quickly and decisively as possible.
This isn't about training, it's about proving whether your abilities are real or just hype.
That night, Maria lay awake thinking about everything that had led her to this moment. From the community center in East Riverside to the most elite military training facility in the world, every step had been building toward this demonstration. Tomorrow, she would face the ultimate test of her abilities in front of the people who could determine the direction of her future. She thought about Frank Morrison, who had first taught her that heart mattered more than size. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much to give her the opportunity to pursue her dreams. She thought about all the instructors who had helped her develop her skills and had believed in her potential even when others doubted. Most of all, she thought about the responsibility that came with her abilities. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for the principle that excellence could come from unexpected places, that size and age were irrelevant to true skill, and that innovation could emerge from the combination of natural talent and relentless dedication. Tomorrow would determine whether Maria Santos was truly the exceptional fighter everyone believed her to be, or whether she would finally meet an opponent whose skills exceeded her own. Either way, she was ready for the challenge. She had spent her entire life preparing for moments like this, and she wouldn't let fear or doubt prevent her from giving her absolute best effort. The stage was set for the ultimate test of everything Maria had learned about combat, about herself, and about the true meaning of strength. In less than 24 hours, she would face Command Master Chief Hayes in front of an audience of the most influential military leaders in the country. The outcome would determine not just her own future, but, potentially, the future of combat training itself. The morning of the demonstration arrived with a clarity that seemed almost supernatural. Maria woke before dawn, her mind calm despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. She had learned from years of training that the moments before crucial tests were best spent in quiet preparation rather than anxious anticipation. The demonstration was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main training facility, which had been cleared of all regular activities for the event. As Maria walked through the corridors toward the training area, she could feel the weight of expectation from everyone she passed. Word of the demonstration had spread throughout the base, and she knew that her performance would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Captain Stone met her at the entrance to the facility, his expression serious but supportive. "How are you feeling, Santos?" "Ready, sir," Maria replied, and she was surprised to realize that she truly meant it. "Good. Remember, this isn't just about proving your abilities, it's about demonstrating that excellence can come from unexpected places. You represent something important today." The training facility had been transformed for the demonstration. Portable seating had been installed around a large mat area, creating an arena-like atmosphere. The audience consisted of some of the most influential people in military special operations: Admiral Hendricks, several generals from various branches, senior officers from allied militaries, and civilian defense officials whose decisions shaped policy for the entire military. Command Master Chief Hayes was already in the training area, going through a warm-up routine that displayed the fluid movements of someone who had spent decades perfecting his combat skills. At 53 years old, he moved with the controlled power of a much younger man, and his presence commanded respect from everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Hendricks announced to the assembled audience, "today we're here to observe a unique demonstration of combat capabilities. Petty Officer Santos will be facing Command Master Chief Hayes in an unrestricted combat encounter. This is not a training exercise or a sporting event, this is a realistic assessment of combat effectiveness." Maria walked onto the mat and faced Hayes across the training area. The difference in their physical presence was striking. Hayes looked like he had been specifically designed for combat, while Maria appeared almost delicate by comparison. The murmur of conversation from the audience suggested that many of them were questioning whether this demonstration would be meaningful. "Santos," Hayes said as they faced each other, "I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for what you've accomplished. But, today, I'm going to fight you the same way I would fight any opponent in a life-or-death situation. I hope you're prepared for that level of intensity." "I am, Master Chief," Maria replied. "And I hope you're prepared for techniques you've never seen before." Hayes smiled grimly. "We'll see about that." The referee for the demonstration was Senior Chief Daniels, who had insisted on officiating personally after his own encounters with Maria. "This encounter will continue until one fighter is unable to continue or yields," he announced. "There are no time limits and no restrictions on techniques. Begin when ready." For a moment, both fighters stood perfectly still, studying each other with the intensity of chess masters contemplating their opening moves. Hayes was analyzing Maria's stance, looking for weaknesses or tells that would give him an advantage. Maria was doing something entirely different. She was reading the patterns in Hayes' micro-movements, learning his energy signature, and preparing to adapt to whatever style he employed. Hayes made the first move, attacking with a combination that demonstrated why he was considered one of the most dangerous fighters in the military. His strikes were powerful, precise, and delivered with the kind of timing that could only come from decades of experience. Any normal opponent would have been overwhelmed within seconds. But Maria wasn't normal. She moved like water around Hayes' attacks, flowing through openings that seemed too small to exist and striking pressure points with surgical precision. Her counters were so quick and subtle that many people in the audience couldn't see them clearly.
What followed was 5 minutes of the most technically perfect combat anyone in the room had ever witnessed.
Hayes fought with every technique he had learned in 25 years of elite military service, using combinations that had never failed him before. Maria responded with innovations that seemed to emerge in real time, creating new techniques by synthesizing elements from multiple martial arts systems. The breakthrough came when Hayes attempted a complex grappling sequence that would have been impossible for most opponents to escape. He used his size and strength advantages to trap Maria in a position where her mobility was severely limited. For most fighters, this would have been the end of the encounter. But Maria had learned to find opportunities in impossible situations. Even as Hayes secured what should have been a finishing hold, she was analyzing the biomechanics of his position and looking for leverage points that he hadn't considered. She found 3 pressure points that were accessible despite her constrained position, and she struck them in a sequence that caused Hayes' grip to weaken just enough for her to escape. The escape itself was a work of art. Maria flowed out of Hayes' hold like liquid, transitioned smoothly into a counterattack, and used leverage to reverse their positions completely. Within seconds, Hayes found himself on the defensive against techniques that seemed to come from nowhere. The end came suddenly and decisively. Hayes committed to a powerful strike that would have devastated any normal opponent, but Maria wasn't where she was supposed to be when the attack arrived. Instead, she was inside his guard, striking pressure points that caused his nervous system to temporarily shut down. Hayes collapsed to the mat, conscious but unable to move. The training facility fell into complete silence. Command Master Chief Hayes, the most feared and respected combat instructor in the Navy, lay motionless on the mat while Maria knelt beside him, checking to make sure he was uninjured. "Master Chief, are you all right?" Maria asked quietly. "I can't move," Hayes replied, his voice filled with amazement rather than distress. "What did you do to me?" "Temporary nerve disruption," Maria explained as she began massaging specific points to restore Hayes' motor function. "The effects will wear off in a few minutes." As feeling returned to his limbs, Hayes sat up slowly and looked at Maria with an expression of profound respect. "In 25 years of combat training and real-world operations, I've never encountered anything like what you just did. How is it possible for someone with your limited experience to defeat me so decisively?" "Experience isn't just about time," Maria replied, helping Hayes to his feet. "It's about how deeply you understand the principles behind what you're doing. I may not have 25 years of experience, but I've learned to see patterns that others miss." The audience erupted into discussion as the implications of what they had witnessed sank in. Admiral Hendricks stood up and walked onto the mat, her expression thoughtful and slightly odd. "Santos, what we just observed challenges fundamental assumptions about combat training and effectiveness," she said. "You've demonstrated capabilities that exceed those of our most elite instructors, using techniques that appear to be entirely original." "Thank you, Admiral," Maria replied. "Don't thank me yet," Hendricks said. "Because now we need to figure out what to do with you." The discussion that followed the demonstration lasted for hours and involved some of the most senior military leaders in the country. Maria found herself in the unprecedented position of being consulted about her own future by people whose decisions affected military policy at the highest levels. "The question isn't whether Santos has exceptional abilities," General Patricia Morrison explained to the assembled group. "The question is how we can best utilize those abilities to benefit our military readiness." "She could revolutionize our entire approach to combat training," suggested Colonel James Wright from Army Special Operations. "If we could understand how she does what she does, we could potentially improve the effectiveness of all our special operations personnel. But we also need to consider her individual development," Admiral Hendricks pointed out. "Santos is still only 19 years old. We have a responsibility to provide her with opportunities that will allow her to reach her full potential." The debate continued throughout the afternoon, with representatives from different branches arguing for various paths forward. Some wanted Maria to focus on developing training curricula that could be used throughout the military. Others believed she should be given operational assignments that would allow her to utilize her combat skills directly. Still others argued that she should be assigned to research and development programs that could help create the next generation of military technology. Finally, Admiral Hendricks called for a private meeting with Maria to discuss her preferences. They met in a small conference room adjacent to the main training facility, away from the political pressures and competing interests that had dominated the larger discussion. "Santos, you've heard the various opinions about your future," Hendricks began. "But, before we make any decisions, I want to know what you want to do." Maria had been thinking about this question throughout the day, weighing her own desires against the opportunities and responsibilities that came with her demonstrated abilities. "Admiral, I want to continue developing my skills and learning from the best instructors in the world," Maria said. "But I also want to use what I've learned to help other fighters reach their potential. I think I can do both by working with elite units while also developing new training methods." "That's a mature perspective," Hendricks said. "And it aligns well with what we're thinking. We'd like to offer you a unique assignment that would allow you to work with various special operations units while also leading research into advanced combat training techniques." Hendricks explained the proposed assignment in detail. Maria would be attached to a joint special operations unit that worked with elite teams from all branches of the military. She would participate in their training exercises, provide tactical consultation on combat techniques, and help develop new methods for preparing special operations personnel. This assignment would be unprecedented, Hendricks explained. "You would be the youngest person ever assigned to this level of special operations work, and you would be breaking new ground in terms of what roles are available to someone with your background." The offer was everything Maria had hoped for and more. It would allow her to continue learning and growing while also contributing to the development of other fighters. Most importantly, it would give her the opportunity to prove that excellence could emerge from unexpected backgrounds and that innovation often came from those who approached problems from entirely new perspectives. "I accept, Admiral," Maria said without hesitation. "Excellent," Hendricks replied. "But there's one more thing. Part of your assignment will involve working with instructors from allied military forces. You'll be sharing your techniques with fighters from around the world and learning from their approaches to combat training." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and transition. Maria found herself working with teams of researchers who were trying to understand the scientific basis for her abilities. They conducted detailed analyses of her movement patterns, measured her reaction times, and studied her visual processing capabilities. The results were fascinating and slightly disturbing. Maria's visual processing speed was significantly faster than normal human ranges, allowing her to see and analyze movement patterns that others missed entirely. Her pattern recognition abilities were off the charts, enabling her to identify complex sequences and predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy. Most remarkably, her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources simultaneously was at a level that researchers had never encountered before. "Santos, these test results suggest that your combat abilities aren't just the result of training and experience," Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher, explained. "You appear to have neurological capabilities that are genuinely exceptional." "What does that mean?" Maria asked. "It means that while training and dedication got you to this level, you were born with certain advantages that allowed you to maximize the benefits of that training in ways that wouldn't be possible for most people." Maria found this information both encouraging and sobering. It explained why she had always been able to see patterns that others missed, but it also meant that her abilities might be difficult for others to replicate completely. However, the research also showed that many of her techniques could be taught to others, even if they couldn't be executed at quite the same level. The training methods she had developed could significantly improve the combat effectiveness of normal fighters, even if they couldn't create other fighters exactly like her. As her assignment officially began, Maria found herself working with some of the most elite military units in the world. She trained with British SAS teams, worked with German special forces, and shared techniques with Israeli military instructors. Each group brought different perspectives and approaches to combat training, and Maria learned something valuable from every encounter. But the most meaningful part of her new role was working with younger fighters who reminded her of herself when she had first started training. These were people who had been told they weren't big enough, strong enough, or experienced enough to compete at the highest levels. Maria worked with them individually, teaching them to see patterns, to use their size as an advantage, and to trust their instincts even when conventional wisdom suggested they were wrong. The most important thing to remember, Maria would tell these students, is that your limitations only matter if you accept them. Every disadvantage can become an advantage if you understand how to use it properly. One of her students was a 22-year-old Marine named David Kim, who stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and had been struggling in advanced combat training despite obvious technical skill. Working with Maria, he learned to use his speed and agility to overwhelm larger opponents, and within 6 months he was outperforming fighters who had previously dominated him.
How did you know I could do this? Kim asked after a particularly successful training session.
Because I recognized something in you that reminded me of myself, Maria replied. You have the heart of a fighter and the intelligence to adapt.
Those are the only things that really matter.
As Maria settled into her new role, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from East Riverside to the pinnacle of military combat training. She had proven that size and age were irrelevant to true excellence, that innovation could emerge from unexpected places, and that the right combination of talent and dedication could overcome any obstacle. But, more importantly, she had learned that her greatest satisfaction came not from her own achievements, but from helping others discover their own potential. Every student she trained, every technique she developed, every barrier she broke down made it easier for the next person who had been told they couldn't succeed. The scared 12-year-old who had walked into Frank Morrison's community center program had become one of the most respected combat instructors in the military. But the journey was far from over. Maria knew that her greatest challenges and most important contributions were still ahead of her, waiting to be discovered in the endless pursuit of excellence that would define the rest of her life. 3 years had passed since Maria Santos first walked into the Naval Special Warfare Training Center at Coronado, and the impact of her presence had rippled through the entire military special operations community. At 22, she had become one of the most sought-after combat instructors in the world, with her techniques being taught at elite training facilities across multiple continents. But success had brought its own challenges. The more famous Maria became, the more people wanted to test themselves against her, and the pressure to constantly prove herself had begun to take its toll. Every training session became a potential challenge to her reputation. Every new student wanted to be the one who finally defeated the legendary Maria Santos, and every instructor she worked with felt compelled to test their skills against hers. The weight of these expectations came to a head during a joint training exercise between American and British Special Forces. Maria had been invited to demonstrate her techniques to a group of SAS instructors, and what was supposed to be a collaborative training session had turned into something more competitive than educational. The British instructors were among the most elite fighters in the world, with decades of combined experience in real combat situations. They had heard about Maria's reputation but remained skeptical that someone so young could truly possess the abilities attributed to her. "We've heard the stories," said Major James Whitfield, the senior British instructor, as they prepared for the demonstration. "But stories tend to grow in the telling. We're interested in seeing what the reality looks like." The challenge in his tone was unmistakable, and Maria felt the familiar weight of having to prove herself all over again. Despite everything she had accomplished, there was always someone new who needed to see her abilities firsthand before they would believe. "I understand your skepticism, Major," Maria replied diplomatically. "I'm happy to demonstrate whatever techniques you'd like to see." "Actually," Whitfield said, "we prefer a more direct evaluation. One-on-one encounters with our most experienced instructors. If your techniques are as effective as we've heard, you should be able to handle our best people." Maria sensed that this had moved beyond professional evaluation into something more personal. The British instructors felt that their own reputations were being questioned by the praise heaped on this young American woman, and they wanted to prove that experience and proven combat effectiveness were more valuable than innovative techniques. "If that's what you prefer," Maria said simply. The first encounter was with Sergeant Major Andrew Clark, a 20-year SAS veteran who had served in every major British military operation of the past 2 decades. Clark was known for his aggressive fighting style and his psychological approach to combat, using intimidation and controlled fury to overwhelm opponents before they could establish their own rhythm. The fight began with Clark attempting to dominate Maria through sheer presence and aggression. He attacked with combinations designed to force her into a defensive mindset, where she would be reacting to his initiatives rather than creating her own opportunities. But Maria had faced this approach many times before. Instead of being intimidated by Clark's aggression, she used it against him, reading his attack patterns and finding openings in his seemingly impenetrable offense. Within 2 minutes, she had neutralized his aggressive style and was controlling the pace of the encounter. When the fight ended with Clark on his back, looking up at Maria with a mixture of respect and disbelief, the other British instructors exchanged glances that suggested their skepticism was beginning to waver. "Impressive," Major Whitfield admitted. "But Clark specializes in aggressive tactics. Let's see how you handle someone with a more technical approach." The second encounter was with Captain Michael Torres, whose fighting style was based on precision and tactical thinking rather than raw aggression. Torres was known for his ability to analyze opponents quickly and exploit weaknesses that others missed. This fight lasted longer than the first, with Torres adapting his strategy multiple times as Maria countered each approach he tried. But, eventually, Maria's ability to see patterns at a deeper level than most fighters allowed her to anticipate his adaptations and stay ahead of his tactical thinking. When Torres yielded after being caught in a joint lock that seemed to appear from nowhere, the British instructors were forced to acknowledge that Maria's abilities were genuine and exceptional. "One more test," Major Whitfield said, and Maria could see from his expression that he was preparing to stake his own reputation on the outcome. "I'd like to face you myself." Major Whitfield was 45 years old with 25 years of SAS experience behind him. He had personally trained hundreds of special operations personnel and had never been defeated in a serious combat encounter. His approach combined technical expertise with psychological warfare and the kind of tactical intelligence that came from decades of real-world experience. The encounter between Maria and Major Whitfield lasted 15 minutes and showcased some of the most sophisticated combat techniques ever demonstrated in a training environment. Whitfield used every resource at his disposal, employing strategies that would have defeated any normal opponent and testing Maria's abilities at a level she had rarely experienced. But Maria rose to meet every challenge Whitfield presented. She adapted to his psychological tactics, countered his technical innovations, and gradually demonstrated that her pattern recognition abilities worked even against opponents who were actively trying to be unpredictable. The end came when Whitfield attempted a complex combination that represented the culmination of his 25 years of experience. Maria not only saw it coming but turned it into an opportunity for a counterattack that left the British major flat on his back, staring at the ceiling in amazement. "Extraordinary," Whitfield said as Maria helped him to his feet. "In 25 years, I've never encountered anything like what you just demonstrated." The British instructors' attitudes toward Maria changed completely after that demonstration. Instead of skepticism, they showed genuine respect and curiosity about her techniques. More importantly, they wanted to learn from her rather than simply testing themselves against her. "How do you do it?" Captain Torres asked during the discussion that followed the demonstrations. "How do you see things that the rest of us miss?" "I think everyone can see the same things I see," Maria replied. "I've just learned to process visual information differently. Instead of focusing on individual movements, I look at the overall patterns and energy flows." "Can you teach others to see these patterns?" Major Whitfield asked. "I've been working on that for the past 3 years," Maria said. "Some people pick it up faster than others, but most fighters can improve their pattern recognition significantly with the right training." The collaboration that followed with the British instructors proved to be one of the most productive periods of Maria's career. Working together, they developed training methods that combined Maria's pattern recognition techniques with traditional SAS tactical approaches. The result was a hybrid training program that dramatically improved the combat effectiveness of students from both countries. But the most significant development came when Major Whitfield suggested that Maria's techniques needed to be tested in real-world situations rather than just training environments. "You've proven your abilities against the best training instructors in the world," he explained. "But the ultimate test of combat effectiveness is how techniques perform in actual high-stakes situations." This observation led to Maria being assigned to a joint special operations unit that conducted classified missions in various international hotspots. Her role was primarily advisory and training-focused, but it would occasionally involve direct participation in operations where her unique skills could make a difference. The first such operation came 6 months later, when intelligence reports indicated that a group of hostages was being held in a heavily defended compound in an undisclosed location. The rescue mission required infiltration of the compound and neutralization of multiple guards without alerting other hostile forces in the area. Maria's assignment was to work with the assault team to develop tactics for silently neutralizing guards using hand-to-hand combat techniques. The challenge was that the guards were professionally trained fighters who would be armed and alert to potential rescue attempts. The traditional approach would be to use weapons for silent takedowns, explained Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the operation commander. But the intelligence suggests that weapons use, even suppressed weapons, might alert other guards in the compound.
What about using close-quarters combat techniques? Maria suggested.
If we can neutralize the guards using hand-to-hand methods, there's no chance of noise alerting other hostiles.
That's incredibly risky, Mitchell replied.
These guards are professionals, and they'll be armed. Getting close enough for hand-to-hand combat means exposing our team to significant danger.
Not if we do it right, Maria said.
I can develop techniques that allow team members to neutralize armed guards before they can react or call for help. The training for the operation took place over 2 intensive weeks, during which Maria worked with the assault team to develop specialized techniques for dealing with armed opponents in close quarters.
The methods she created combined elements from multiple martial arts systems with tactical approaches specific to the mission parameters.
The key innovation was a technique Maria called cascade neutralization, where team members worked in coordinated pairs to neutralize multiple guards simultaneously. One team member would create a distraction while their partner moved in for silent neutralization, with the entire sequence taking less than 3 seconds per guard.
When the mission was executed, Maria's techniques worked flawlessly.
The assault team was able to infiltrate the compound and neutralize all guards without raising any alarms. The hostages were rescued without casualties, and the entire operation was completed in less than 20 minutes.
Outstanding work, Santos, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell said during the post-mission debrief.
Your techniques not only succeeded but exceeded our expectations for effectiveness and safety. The success of the operation led to Maria being assigned to additional high-stakes missions, each of which required her to develop new techniques or adapt existing ones to specific tactical requirements. She worked with counter-terrorism units, provided training to foreign military allies, and contributed to the development of new protocols for special operations missions. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Maria's work was the mentorship program she developed for younger fighters who faced challenges similar to those she had encountered early in her career. Working with military recruits who had been told they weren't physically suited for elite training, Maria helped them discover their own potential and develop techniques that maximized their individual strengths. One of her most successful students was Corporal Lisa Chen, a Marine who stood 5 feet 1 inch tall and had been struggling with the physical requirements of advanced combat training. Working with Maria, Chen learned to use her speed and technical precision to overcome size disadvantages, and within a year she had become one of the top performers in her unit. "You taught me that my size wasn't a limitation," Chen told Maria after completing her advanced training.
"You showed me how to make it an advantage."
"You did that yourself," Maria replied.
"I just helped you see what was already there."
As Maria approached her 25th birthday, she reflected on how far she had come since that scared 12-year-old had first walked into Frank Morrison's community center. She had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that innovation was more valuable than tradition, and that the courage to challenge assumptions could lead to revolutionary breakthroughs. But she also understood that her greatest legacy wasn't her own achievements, it was the fighters she had inspired and trained along the way. Every student who learned to see patterns they had previously missed, every instructor who adopted her techniques, every barrier that was broken down made the world a little more open to excellence from unexpected sources. The culmination of Maria's impact came when the military formally adopted her training methods as part of their standard curriculum for special operations personnel. The Santos method, as it came to be known, was now being taught at elite training facilities around the world, helping thousands of fighters reach levels of effectiveness they had never thought possible. "You've revolutionized how we think about combat training," Admiral Hendricks told her during the ceremony recognizing the formal adoption of her methods. "But, more importantly, you've proven that innovation and excellence can come from anyone, regardless of their background or physical characteristics." As Maria stood on the stage, accepting recognition for her contributions to military combat training, she thought about all the people who had told her she couldn't fight, all the obstacles she had overcome, and all the fighters she had helped discover their own potential. The scared little girl from East Riverside had become one of the most influential combat instructors in the world. But she had never forgotten where she came from or the lessons Frank Morrison had taught her about the importance of heart over size. Looking out at the audience, which included many of the students she had trained over the years, Maria felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had proven that they were wrong, she could fight. But, more importantly, she had proven that anyone could fight if they had the courage to challenge their limitations and the dedication to pursue excellence regardless of the obstacles they faced. The journey that had started in a community center in East Riverside had led to the highest levels of military special operations training. But Maria knew that the most important part of her story wasn't where she had ended up, it was proving that the journey was possible in the first place. Years later, when young fighters faced criticism about their size, age, or background, they would point to Maria Santos as proof that excellence could come from anywhere. They would remember that the girl everyone said couldn't fight had become the instructor who taught some of the most elite warriors in the world how to fight better. And, in community centers, martial arts schools, and military training facilities around the world, instructors would continue to teach the most important lesson Maria Santos had ever learned: that true strength comes not from your size or your background, but from your refusal to accept limitations that others try to place on you. The story of Maria Santos had become more than just one person's journey from underestimation to achievement. It had become proof that the impossible was simply the untested, and that with enough heart, dedication, and willingness to challenge assumptions, anyone could redefine what was possible in their own life.